All right, so that sets the tone, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, I think that that sequence is a good example of what we like to do, which is there's a lot of moving pieces in it. You're getting a lot of information. You're meeting a lot of people. The part of what's scoring this is Bruce Campbell as Ronald Reagan. His speech has the way we're placing his words is also part of the score of it. It feels like so. So I think that those conversations that we had about that were about that of like how can you create an atmosphere mostly for this sequence to take place.
Yeah, and the dialogue sort of created the rhythm of the scene, the way that all sort of played in together. And then you had mentioned wanting to do a whistle and have that be
you
part
can
of
never have too much whistling.
Yeah. so that was a fun thing. Trying to whistle a melody is not an easy task.
Was that you whistling?
Well, it started out as me, and then so it's sort of a mix of me and I can't remember the guy's name, but he's the person who does it for the Prairie Home Companion. The guy who does all of the mouth sounds for Prairie Home Companion is 90% of the whistling that you hear is him.
A very nice full circle Minnesota kind of thing there. So maybe we could start by taking it back to the beginning of this season. Noah, what did you want Fargo Year 2 to sound like? What did you have in your head as you were working the season out?
Well, there was a continuation of the orchestral identity that we'd established in the first year, which was itself inspired by Carter Burwell's score. And yet we did a lot of things, I felt like, in that first year that weren't part of the Carter Burwell lexicon of what he'd put into the movie Fargo. One thing I was very clear on is that none of the musical cues that we used in the first season we could reuse here, because a lot of the way that we talked about the music was through the themes of the different characters, and so the music was so tied for me with those characters and that story in the first year that we kind of had to start all over again. I ended up, there was a lot of Mahler that I started pushing Jeff's way. The music is a little more muscular, I think, in the second season. There's a little more sort of drama to it, in a more macho way, for lack of a better word, I think. But again, it was about who are these people? What is the musical identity of Ed and Peggy versus the Gerhardts, and so Jeff and I, we start talking literally at the outline phase, before there are scripts even, and talking through the different ideas and underpinnings and themes and everything, and then Jeff starts writing, and usually by the time I'm scouting locations before we've shot anything, I have 8 or 9 pieces of music that he's written already.
Yeah, a lot of that, as I'm reading outlines and reading scripts, just trying to see how we can both sort of come to that musical identity of the show. And one of the funny things that happened at the beginning of season 2 was we were talking about these characters, and you had these outlines, and I ended up writing a theme for a character which I didn't know was going to happen, who ended up dying in the very first or second episode, Skip Sprang. Yeah. And I remember writing a theme for him, and then as I read the second script, I was like, oh. Thinking that theme could sort of, but once, and then it's a theme that gets put to bed.
Well, and we also, in the first year, we had a washing machine that was very much part of the sound tradition of the show, and that Jeff sampled that, and that became a musical instrument. And then this year was the typewriter that we ended up using, which was not part of the sound design, but literally used as a musical instrument by Jeff.
And the meat grinder too, right?
And the meat grinder actually ended up being used a little bit as well. Yeah.
How do you like working with those kinds of non-traditional instruments?
For me, that's the funnest part of it. It's being able to write music and then sort of incorporate the elements of the actual narrative of the show into the score is really really an interesting thing. Obviously, the typewriter began because Skip was the owner of this typewriter store, and that sort of made sense. And then we went up to see the set, and we saw the butcher shop, and the meat grinder was making the sound. I was like, well, I got to record that and see how we can incorporate that into the score. But that's just a lot of fun to do.
And then how much did the music of the era inspire the score? There's that one of my favorite cues from the season is the Hansi's Funk, which is that wonderful horn-driven cue.
It's funny. We sort of left a lot of the influence of the time to the songs in the show, but I did try to record the score in a way that had more of a 70s sound, like more than what the first season was. This needed to sound a little more like what that sound was in the 70s. Things were just a little smoother sounding, and things were just a little more glued together the way records were in the 70s. And I think that I approached the score that way, but not as much as a cue like that, which was like, okay, here's a funk song with a horn, which was inspired by some of the other songs in that particular episode as well.
Well, I think that's a good segue to bring Maggie into the conversation. At what point did you start meeting with Noah, and what was your relationship, your working relationship like with Jeff?
It grew, because they did season 1 together, and I was not on season 1, but we met once. Just Noah and I met, and then the three of us met, and you played us all those songs in the beginning. So we were introduced then, Jeff and I, and then we started talking throughout the whole thing. And honestly, he and I have become close friends since then. It's been a nice working relationship since. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we can open it up a little bit more. Noah, you mentioned that you were pushing some Mahler Jeff's way. Were there any pop cues from the era that you were pushing Maggie's way as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen a lot of things from the 70s, right? But usually what we see is New York or LA in the 70s. We don't see a lot of the 70s in the middle of the country, where it's both 1979 and also kind of 1972, and also a little bit 1964 and also a little bit 1945 still, you know what I mean? So I liked that I started to think about Ed the Butcher, who is literally wants to grow up to be his dad. So he's probably stuck in the 50s on some level, or early 60s, and so I started to think about Burl Ives as like the sound of Ed, and found that great 1 hour ahead of the posse song that we used for his montage when he was cleaning up the garage. The Blood in the Garage, which starts off, and what I love for cues to do is if it starts off as one thing and ends as another. So it starts off as just this sort of jaunty Burl Ivesy, 1 hour ahead of the posse thing, and he's cleaning, and it's sort of upbeat, and then it ends with this very soulful, may God have mercy on his soul, like that suddenly the cue becomes this darker, more interesting thing.
While he's cleaning up the blood.
Yeah, and so, there was there's these great country funk albums, country funk like 1974 to 1978, that we had in the house, and that I pushed Maggie's way as well, and that idea of, because it is, we don't really want to do disco or the classic 70s sounds, but that music was interpreted both in country music and then also internationally. I asked Maggie to really start looking for the 70s as interpreted, what was happening in 1979 in Africa, for example, or Japan, and we ended up with a couple of those cues as well.
What kind of discoveries did you make in that process? There was one episode I remember has a lot of library music cues from one specific composer that were like
the Mahler and Brahms,
or that were sort of like Cop Chase 194 or whatever. Like all the song titles have numbers in them.
I don't know.
I wish I could remember the artist.
I don't know. Yeah.
Gosh.
Well, I mean, Noah, when our first creative meeting, he sent me in like 8 different directions. One of them was the international direction, and then he had me look into the country funk came later, and that's put out by Light in the Attic, and who their office was like 2 blocks from me, so I got to go over to their offices and dig around. And then I was listening to a lot of Jethro Tull and punk, and we were listening to a lot of prog rock in the beginning, and not much of it made it in.
No, I mean the most we had. A lot of it was really expensive, the Kraftwerk stuff. I mean, that was the thing with '79 was you started to see the early '80s stuff come out, and we had that one Devo Q, and which played great, and then there were a couple of other things. I had this Children of the Sun song that I really wanted to use. The Billy Thorpe song that we used a couple of times, and we had the USC marching band come in and record with Jeff, because I also really like to play with just percussion for some things. We did with Wrench and Numbers in the first year. Their theme was just percussion, and we recorded the marching band.
Yeah.
Those kids were really
they were so
freaked
excited.
out.
They were freaked out. They were. It was the interesting part about having a college marching band in the recording studio, recording on one of their favorite television shows, is that they were all so totally geeked out by being there. And I had Picture Up, and they were looking at a show that they weren't going to be able to see for another 8 months, but there it was on the thing, and they were very excited to be there. But that was a lot of fun. When you called me and you were like, what about how do we do a marching band kind of thing? And I was like, I know just the right people, and that was a lot of fun. But to get back to the sort of more prog rock thing, we didn't end up using a lot of prog rock songs, but I ended up trying to infuse some of that into the score with this sort of synthetic kind of thing, and that sort of oscillating synthesizer thing that we did more towards the end of the season.
Yeah.
That ended up being like, I like to call the band Mike Milligan and the Kitchen Brothers.
Right. Yeah.
And that was kind of a fun thing as well.
Yeah, and then there was this Jeff Wayne, War of the Worlds craziness that I found, which was just like I guess it was a rock opera from the 70s about War of the Worlds, which starts out with just Richard Burton reading War of the Worlds, and suddenly it becomes like a disco thing. And there was a whole thing about using it because...
It was a licensing nightmare.
Yeah, and I think if you watched the show in the UK, you didn't see that song, you saw score instead for some odd reason. H.G. Wells is copyright protected over there in a different way. But, I'm really open to all sources and sounds, and I think that's the fun of it as well. And in the first season, we ended an episode after Lester had basically escaped from the hospital and managed to get himself back in after framing his brother with this Italian pop song from the 60s, which just had the right feel to it. It turned out that guy was like the Frank Sinatra of Italy. Like, it was a hugely expensive song for some reason. But I'm always interested in finding a piece of music that is unexpected. And I think when music comes in that you're not familiar with, you're experiencing it in a different way than, I know that song. Mm-hmm. But then again, sometimes that song, the Jethro Tull opener of an episode is, or using War Pigs is not just a way to spend a corporation's money, but it's the perfect piece. So
we could show the Yama Yama clip.
The International. We used the opening of our third episode, which had a combination of we started with a flamenco cue that kind of turned into this other cue. So.
Katana Brothers, I think, is the name of the band, and then it goes into Yama Yama by a band named Yamasuki, that's Japan. I think. Do you know? Yeah.
You talk about conveying information efficiently. It doesn't get more efficient than the split screen.
No, it doesn't, and that was part of the fun of the design of it, which was not intended from the beginning. But once I was in the editing room, I realized we just had a lot more moving pieces than we did in the first year, and that I wanted to keep them alive because they're all on a collision course. So unlike in, say, Game of Thrones, where you'll see one story and another story, and you never go back to that first story in the whole hour, I felt like I needed to keep the tension alive. All these people are coming for Peggy and Ed, and so the split screen was a way to kind of keep multiple stories going at one time. But it also offered, a sort of convergence of one image next to another, and then, how you play it with music as well. So, and it added to it feels period. It feels like a 70s filmmaking technique. So, I think that was the fun of it. And, that song is a great example of something that clearly feels dated and of an era, but because you're unfamiliar with it, it really is, it creates an experience in watching it that's different than a song
Maggie, I think you were being a little self-deprecating earlier when you were saying that the licensing things, like talk about royalties and stuff, that's a little boring. But like, were there cues and songs that you wanted to use that you didn't wind up being able to use because of budget concerns, or because there was no place where they might fit?
I think we had some that came out because of budget, just one. But honestly, I would say about 25% of my job for Fargo season 2 was maintaining relationships. Like with the Richard Burton one, the H.G. Wells one, I had to, spend hours and hours on the phone kind of finessing a relationship with this guy in the UK that did not want to give it to us. And then same with Children of the Sun, that was that kooky guy, I won't say his name, but I was on the phone with him almost every day talking to him just because we wanted that song. We wanted it for a good price, and we got it. So, that's kind of the music supervisor's role that a lot of people don't know. There's a lot of that going on in the background. You have to sweet talk people and try to get their stuff for a good price. But I don't think I think we just had one come out from,
Yeah, I kept waiting for them to tell me I had to stop spending their money.
I did too.
But look, there's a power to this, to being able to use the expensive cues, which is that it sort of expands the power of the piece geometrically. When you see a Scorsese movie and literally in 60 seconds he's got like Rolling Stones and in 3 or 4 different cues, like there's something that makes it feel epic about having this music in there, and I think they understood that it's a lot to spend for music for a show, but that this movie is now going to live in perpetuity. This 10-hour movie we made, and the music really is so powerful and expands the impact of the show, I think. So I'm always going to push, and you can say stop, but I might make you say it 2 or 3 times.
Because you need the USC marching band to.
I do. Well, they were the cheapest aspect.
Yeah,
They might have been the cheapest
nothing.
thing.
You can get those kids working pretty cheap, but
You can't. I think it was that you can't technically pay them, and that was the thing. Like there was a donation, an anonymous donation made to the music program at USC that I had to finagle. But yes, that was probably the most cost-effective way of doing part of the score.
But somehow it all has to work together, the
Right.
score and the songs, and there has to be a musical identity to the show, and all those elements get introduced early on. And then there was the other aspect of it that we haven't talked about yet, which is that I decided I wanted to do covers of songs from Coen Brothers movies. So we started reaching out to artists to do that, and got some really great artists to record. A lot of Austin groups, actually. White Denim did See What Condition My Condition Is In as a disco song, and Shaky Graves did a song for us from Oh Brother, and Jeff Tweedy did the Jose Feliciano song from the movie because I let him choose, and that's what he chose.
We wanted him to do an Eagles cover.
Yeah, I wanted him to do Peaceful Easy Feeling, but it turned out
Like, no.
that Jeff Tweedy famously hates the Eagles, so I couldn't talk him into it. But But yeah, and then the thing about that was to use songs that you knew but out of context, So to take Lisa Hannigan did a version of Danny Boy, which they'd used so famously in Miller's Crossing, to score Albert Finney's gun battle with the guys who come. And then we used it, though, in a much different way in our most Miller's Crossing scene from the show when Bear walked Simone out into the woods, which is very much a scene out of Miller's Crossing. And then we used the song from that movie, but in a different way. So that was exciting as well, which was finding ways to use songs that were really associated with the Coens, but using them in a different context.
And you recorded the first one of those cues that we hear in the show,
yeah,
correct?
Jeff and I did that one, the Go to Sleep song from Oh Brother. Yeah. No, it's fun to. We make these things by hand. This is artisanal television.
But I didn't know he was going to do it. We were having an email exchange about who should do it, and then I get an email from Jeff, and he's like, "Hey, look what we did last night." I didn't even know Noah could sing. So, and he can.
You mentioned that people know these songs from another context already. Is there any worry about living up to the legacy that they have in those moments that they've been used in the films?
So the first year we did it once, right? Because we did Ode to Joy, right, which was the Coens had used famously in Raising Arizona with banjo and whistling. Again, whistling is awesome, but so I called Jeff and I was like, I think we need to do Ode to Joy, but with steel drums. Mm-hmm. And so then he had to find a steel drum player who could play Ode to Joy.
Finding a steel drum player who can read music,
right?
That's a whole thing.
Yeah. Jeff, at what point in the season do you see Noah's phone number coming up on your phone and you just sigh and?
No, I never sigh. It's always sort of like I take a breath of. I'm very interested to hear what the direction that I'm going to take today is. Like what is the thing that's going to happen today? And like that phone call when he was like, "How about Ode to Joy and how we do that? How about steel drums?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's actually really cool." And then knowing that I had to sort of go down that road to figure out how to do that and how to make that work. Again, finding a steel drum player who could actually read the music of Ode to Joy, which is not an uncomplicated piece of music to play.
But again, it's such it's that moment when Lester's cleaning up. He's gotten away with it, and he's cleaning the house, and there's this lightness. I mean, the steel drum, which is sort of like your Caribbean Vacation sound to it, and yet it is a piece of music that if you're a Coen Brothers fan is very clear what it's an homage to, and so I don't know. I mean, the hope is to create an experience for the audience that kind of defies describing on some level, and music is such a part of how you feel about what you're watching, and there definitely have been moments where in the first season Keith Carradine was telling a story to Allison Tolman, and there's a song on the jukebox, and as he's talking, the song fades out, and the silence becomes the score for that moment. So I'm always interested in really the sound design and those ways of telling a story and creating a mood that the audience maybe isn't even aware of why they're feeling what they're feeling.
I think it might be time to open it up to questions from the audience. So,
how do you use placeholder music in the edit, or if you do it all?
Well, as I said, Jeff writes a lot before we start shooting, so a lot of what we do is we're using the actual score, and that was very helpful in the first. The first year I went out and we shot the pilot, and Jeff had already written the music, and so I was able to show the first cut that the network saw literally was scored. It wasn't just temp music from the Carter Burwell score, which was important because we were trying to signal to the network that the musical identity of the show, like the show itself, was similar but different, and the danger of using that Burwell music is that it's so iconic that once they hear it associated with the picture, they're not going to want to replace it. Do you know what I mean? And so I was always very cautious about putting stuff in that I thought they would fall in love with that I didn't want them to have. So, sometimes, part of what I always look for is just the musical inspiration for me of it. So sometimes, the whistling, the opening cue of 5, I think there was some weird Italian, Sergio Leone kind of piece that was a placeholder, and then we did the sort of Americanized version of it. So those things always happen, but mostly it's about using the material Jeff has already written, or then saying, you know what, there's a color we don't have in this palette, and we should really write to that.
We'll sometimes also watch the cut dry.
Yeah.
And without any placeholder music, just to sort of feel where music should be or shouldn't be.
Yeah, usually with director's cuts, they'll always cut it together with music, and I'll ask for a version without any music, and I'll watch the cut without music, and I find that to be helpful, because if the music is throwing me out of it, it's hard for me to know if the scene's working or not. So a lot of the time, I'll probably watch it the first time with the music they put in, but then when I go back to it, I just want to start from scratch with a lot of the music, unless what they're doing is really working.
Right there?
So my question is, on Fargo, the TV series, do you think about striking a balance between the music kind of playing straight ahead what's in the scene, what the characters are feeling, and the music providing ironic counterpoint to the scene or commentary on it?
I think that we tend to do a lot of counterpoint. I think that they did it in a way that was great, and I think we sort of try to keep that same concept with our own version of it. But I would say, there is a time and place for playing what's on the screen and then playing what's not on the screen, and then or not playing anything of what's going on the screen. I think that we tend to do that same. We have that same sort of ethic, I think.
Yeah, and I think that score. I would defend the use with that car and the distance of what they're scoring is the landscape. They're scoring the experience of being an individual in this hostile sort of environment, and there is that majesty, of small thing, big space that we play with as well, which is. It's hard to get the sweep and the scope, within scenes. You have to be in those big outdoor shots, those panoramas, in order to really build the music up in that way. And there's less of it in the second year. We sort of had less sort of scenes of characters traveling between places, and I felt that as well, that it was missing on some level. So we try to add those things in, but. You have to tell the audience that they're watching something that is has a majesty to it, and I think the score for that really took what was a kind of quirkier, smaller story and gave it this nobility, I think.
Back there?
Interestingly, so I write vertically, so I write all the parts myself, and then I hand off to an orchestrator who basically takes the parts that I've written and just puts it on the page for all of the orchestra. For the marching band, I actually had to hire someone who can do percussion notation, which I can't do. So I wrote all these parts out on in a MIDI computer kind of thing, and then spit those parts out to this percussion orchestrator, and she wrote all the parts for all the different pieces.
Yep. We're doing a trifold vinyl release that actually comes out into the stores Tuesday.
Yeah, the score and songs
and
from the second year. Some of them being the covers that we had done, and some of them just being the songs that were chosen from for inclusion in the show. It's an interesting show to there's no real product placement available, because you can't say to Chrysler, like, we want to sell the best car you made in 1979, so but the music still has value, I think, and especially that older music being more expensive to license. But I don't know. It's I think that if we make something great, then those ancillary opportunities will present themselves. But I just have to focus on making something great. So.
But why is it that TV scores are so often less available commercially than film scores are?
You don't make money off of soundtracks. People don't make money.
I think that it's more of a creative thing than it is
Really?
a financial thing. Yeah, I think that television scores in general, and I think it's changing now, are less listenable in terms of, like, would you put it on and actually listen to it? We tend to make music in terms of the score that is sort of more vast in terms, like there are these 6 and 7 minute pieces of music that get edited down for use in the television show, but it gets written as music as opposed to just like little bits and transitions and stuff, which you see a lot in television. We don't tend to score the shows that way.
Yeah, TV's a lot of underscore,
Yeah.
and especially if you watch broadcast, it's like there's 38 minutes of music in a 42-minute show, and you're just like, why is it so music?
Right.
And no one wants to listen to that. But
Right.
but yeah, I think again where the score is usually going to be at its most sort of sweeping and is in those moments without dialogue and either with action or transitions or moving through epic spaces, and TV does that less. I think it's usually more like how do we get from one person talking to the next scene of one person talking.
Maggie, you mentioned that the soundtracks don't sell as much maybe as they once did. Do you think that we're still in an era when a band getting its song placed in a TV show can kind of break it the way that we were in maybe the mid-aughts?
Yeah, I do. I still definitely. I mean, and I also think bands and musicians now, they're not making money selling their records, and so it's a good way of them earning an income. I don't think soundtracks aren't selling because you can get the music online now. There was a soundtrack listing built on Spotify by the fans of the show. So, I mean, really what we have to offer in the soundtrack that's coming out on Tuesday is Jeff's original score, and the covers that are original covers of a pre-existing song. So.
And the packaging is also pretty
Yeah.
fantastic.
If you're a fan of packaging.
Or just in terms of good graphic design, this is a show that always has a lovely marketing package in those terms. So.
Yeah. We had one more clip, I think, if you wanted to show the Sylvia's Mother clip, which was the Dr. Hook song. I was a big Dr. Hook fan.
He was. That was one of the bands you told me
Yeah.
about in our first meeting.
Yeah, which
And
turned
so-
out to be crazy expensive because, Shel Silverstein wrote
Yes.
the songs for them, so the publishing is really expensive on those. But I was looking for a place the whole season to use a Dr. Hook song, and we found a spot for it, which I was really happy with.
All right, so let's take it out with this Dr. Hook clip.
So, again, it's... it starts as source, right? It starts playing on the record player, and then it gets a little louder, and then it becomes full score, and it's a song about a phone call, which is sort of interesting. I mean, there's that weird confluence of lyrics and picture, and then, it's a very emotional song, and it starts off being this sort of a little bit cheesy soft rock kind of thing, and then becomes very emotional, so. That's what I loved about it, was that it's doing a lot of different things at the same time, and then it comes out so nicely too, going into something that's much more tense. So, that's the fun of like trying to find the perfect song is not just gonna do one thing, but gonna do multiple things.
All right, well, thanks everybody for coming. If you can stick around. Right next door at the Hulu Badge Holders Lounge, we've got some acts from the soundtrack. Who's going to be here, Noah?
Play so Quiet Company. A couple of local bands are going to play. Quiet Company and Sweet Spirit, and then Ruby Jane and Jeff and I will do a couple of songs with her, and it'll be fun. What else are you going to do? It's Sunday. It's hot outside.
All right, let's have another round of applause for our panel here, for Maggie Phillips, for Jeff Russo, for Noah Hawley. Thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of the festival.